What's up, YouTube? Good evening. It's Davao Tones coming to you again from Michigan. It's a brisk December night, and I'm knocking these videos out. We are ready to get out of here and move to the tropics. We just got our tickets to Vietnam, and we should be leaving by March at the latest. So we are just killing time, getting our things packed, shipping some things over to the Philippines. I will be staying in Vietnam until my final blacklist removal paperwork, my bond paperwork comes back from the Philippines. We're hoping for February. We got open-end tickets for March that can be changed, and we are ready to go. We are ready to go to greener pastures. Now, there was a few different topics that I wanted to go over tonight, so I had to pick one. One of the topics I was going to talk about was business in the Philippines, the Sari Sari store. Another topic was going to be my experience in Detroit, moving to Detroit, moving back. But the one I think is the most interesting, and the one I've got the most exciting story for, is probably the my experience with Yamashita's gold in the Philippines. Now, if you've been to the Philippines and you've spent any amount of time, any length of time in the Philippines, you've more than likely heard of Yamashita's gold. Tamayuki Yamashita was a World War II general for the Japanese army, and he was tasked with hiding the gold and the treasure that Japan looted from all the countries that they invaded during World War II. All of Southeast Asia, for the most part, China, Korea, and they stretched almost down to Australia before the United States was started making serious gains in the Pacific Ocean. I don't believe until it was I want to say Battle of Midway, that the Japanese actually realized that they weren't going to win the war in the Pacific. Now the Philippines, being in the center of all of these countries, was used as the halfway point to get the gold and the loot back to Japan, back to the main islands of the Japanese Empire. When the Emperor of Japan realized that they probably weren't going to win the war, he and his brother tasked Yamashita, their golden general, to hide all the riches throughout the Philippines. Now the Philippines had something around 175 sites where this gold and treasure and loot was hidden. The Japanese had themselves heavily fortified in the Philippines, and they thought that they could either make their last stand in the Philippines and come back for this later, or once they were defeated down the road, they could come back for the loot again later. Little did they expect that they would be tried for war crimes, and General Yamashita was executed and hung on December 7th, 1945. I believe he was executed in 46. Now since then, it's been a big legend, a myth, that there's treasure everywhere in the Philippines. I mean, it got down to the point where they were running out of time, and they were handing this down to their soldiers, their NCOs, and their officers, and telling them, go bury this, and we'll come back for it after the war. It's rumored that you could be digging the foundation to your home in the Philippines and come across a random gold bar. And in fact, being in Davao City, um, there are a few areas where it's said that this has happened. Um, just a regular family will be out there building their house. Then all of a sudden, you don't see nobody there for a while. And when you come back again, there's a great big beautiful home there. How did that happen? Those people were building a house out of bamboo and nipa. Um, I've told my story a little bit here. Um, I went broke in the Philippines at a young age. I was fresh out of the army, and used a bunch of my savings to go to the Philippines, and I wanted to open a business with my ex, and it all went belly up for me. I left her, I met my wife, started using my VA benefits to go to school, my GI Bill, and was able to get myself back on track somewhat until I was able to leave. And in between there, I tried, to start a couple businesses, just to help better myself and my wife and her family. And they didn't really work for me. I didn't have enough to keep it going. But one of the ventures that I stumbled across was gold hunting in the Philippines. My first restaurant was on San Pedro in Davao City. And at night on San Pedro, all the older foreigners would come out, and they'd make their rounds through the bars and whatnot there. And some of them would stop in and grab a bite to eat or a beer at my little place while I had it going. And I met some characters and became friends with some guys there. And during my time there, I met a gentleman named Carl. He was an American guy, and he introduced me to an older gentleman named Mike. He lived at the hotel down the street. He had been there for years. Before I get too far into my story with Mike and Carl, I'll give you a little backstory on myself, a little bit more. I was a combat engineer in the U.S. Army. We work with demolitions and explosives. We do construction work. We do infantry work. But we're really skilled with landmines, booby traps, IEDs, and things of that sort. And with talking to these guys and telling them what I did in the service, they were interested in me because they themselves were looking for Japanese gold. Carl, he owned a small gold mine in the Philippines and was doing quite well for himself until a series of landslides prompted the government to shut down all the small gold mines in the Philippines, and Carl went out of business. Carl was more or less broke. He introduced me to Mike, the older Australian guy living in the hotel down the road, and Mike's backstory is that he was a Vietnam veteran for the Australian military, and he married a relative of President Ferdinand Marcos, and he was taking part in looking for some of this treasure through his contacts with the ex-president. He divorced that woman, or that woman divorced him or left him. There is no divorce in the Philippines. And kept his kids from him. I don't think he seen his kids in years at that point, or even knew how to find them. But Mike was an interesting character. Um, and Mike had uh, contacts that could probably get me in some trouble talking about it. I'm not quite sure. I've had threats put on my life dealing with all this. Um, got myself into a big mess. Um, could have ended up in Filipino prison. We could have ended up dead. I believe I had a contract put on my life at one point. And I'll get to that later in the story. But Mike had a bunch of artifacts there in his hotel room with him. He had maps that had been brought to him, and he had contacts in which he claimed were through the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. Now, in the midst of all that, I saw a couple sites with them. I was pretty convinced, and what they wanted me to do was, once they got a dig together or a site together that they thought was promising, they wanted me to go in and check for booby traps, check for explosives, and that type of thing, for a percentage of what was found. And me not having anything really at the time, I ate it up. And I was under the impression that I was going to become very, very wealthy. As most foreigners are who get involved in that type of thing in the Philippines. And it's easy to fall into the trap. It really is. But I'm gonna warn you, it's usually a pretty big scam. Mike's contact, who was supposed to have been through the IMF, was a pretty serious guy. He was a medical doctor here in the United States in Los Angeles, California. I'd rather not mention his name. As I said, I've had threats put on my life. And I called him and threatened him as well. And I don't think he expected me to do that. It took him by surprise. But that's later in the story. I ended up separating with my girlfriend, and once I met my wife and things got a little better for me, I went back and paid a visit to Mike, who had had a stroke since the last time I had seen him. And I felt terrible for the guy. He had a girlfriend who would come see him once in a while, and she would take care of him and get him groceries. And his contact through the gold hunting stuff paid his room every month. They paid for him to live there and be their ears to the ground, I guess, more or less. So there were some very believable aspects of this story, and I don't believe I was lied to or misled, because things got very hairy for me there for a minute. But anyway, I felt bad for Mike. He was staying there alone. He was a victim of stroke. He was in real bad shape. And I was getting ready to get another place back in Davao City. We were moving to Davao from Digos. And I told Mike, I said, Mike, I'm going to get an apartment or a house. Why don't I get a 2-bedroom and we'll split it and I'll look after you. And he was more than happy, and he agreed to it. And once we moved in, things kind of changed a little. He was really hard to deal with, and for some reason his girlfriend didn't want him to live with us, and I didn't understand it. But she was very hard to deal with. That led us to Mintal in Davao City, and that's where I stayed until I left. But Mike had a few contacts that he had come through the house, and there's some funny stories that go along with it. One of them were two Muslim women um, who lived out in the provinces outside Davao, and they come across these currency boxes. Now, before World War II, there was um, the United States occupation of the Philippines. We colonized the Philippines after we beat Spain in the Spanish-American War, and I think we either won them or got them through purchase. The Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Cuba. And we too sunk quite a bit of uh, money, treasure into the Philippines. So not only do people find gold bars, barrels of diamonds, but they come across these boxes that are dated 1913. And they have the U.S. presidential seal on the box, and they are filled with large banknotes from the early 1900s. 1913 is, I believe, the big one. I want to say there's some of them that are found from the 30s as well. It's rumored that the United States put a lot of their gold that was supposed to be hidden in Fort Knox in the vault there. It's said that we put a lot of that into the Philippines, but that's just rumor. There's no proof of that to back anything up. But these Muslim women, they brought one of these boxes that were supposed to be sealed up to Mike. I was there for that, and a couple of other meetings. They were getting ready to do a cave dig somewhere in Mindanao, and I was supposed to be a part of it. But then you have this girlfriend of Mike's who was starting fights, and it just made our living situation very difficult. I think one night she thought me and my wife were out and about, and she was mad at us for one reason or another, and she took my toothbrush and rubbed it all over the inside of Mike's bedside pan, his pee pan. Didn't know that I was in there listening. I'm sure glad I was, because I would have definitely brushed my teeth with that toothbrush, and that would have been horrible. But anyways, things came to a head there, and Mike ended up moving out. His girlfriend took him, and I don't know where he went after that. It's kind of sad. I was happy that they left at the time, but it was sad to lose a friendship such as that. And one of the contacts that I met through Mike was an older Filipino gentleman that went by the name Mori, and that's short for a much longer Japanese name. His father was a Japanese soldier. Mori was a Jehovah's Witness in the Philippines. And he himself had spent his entire life looking for these sites that his dad left him information to when he passed away. And I got involved in a dig, or what I thought was going to be a dig. And Carl was involved. And I took one whole refund from my school money. I think it was something around $5,000. I had the land scanned in Calinan, Davao City. Went up there and visited these people who owned this land, and the grandfather must have been in his 90s. We brought them a sack of rice. We bought them fish, food. The old man wasn't being fed. His grandchildren were left to take care of him, and they didn't have money to feed themselves or their children, so he was more or less starving. We brought them up a sack of rice on a few different occasions, and different types of food, It was a horrible thing. But I got to see these Japanese artifacts. There were big bowls, like concrete bowls. I'm not sure what the Japanese use these for. Made out of bunker grade concrete, with Japanese carvings in them. There were big stones with Japanese carvings in them. And the family believed that underneath one of their houses was a 500-pound bomb that was said to have been dropped by an airplane and didn't go off. So it was unexploded ordnance. That was going to be one of the things I was going to take care of. And there was supposed to have been a barrel of diamonds there with that unexploded ordnance. And then there was some deposits, some large deposits of precious metals, platinum and gold. I sunk a bunch of money into here, having the land scanned. And in the end, I think it was the final amount for the dig. And my business partner, Carl and Maury, took the $1,500 that it was supposed to cost to get this thing going, and they disappeared on me. Which at the time was all I had left. And really screwed me over big time. I thought I was giving everything. This was it. We had been doing this for about 7-8 months now. Going through various procedures of the scanning, there was a lot to it. Meeting with these people, spending time up there, going up to Calinan, taking trips up there. And we were supposed to start the dig. And my business partner and my two business partners took my $1,500 to get it going, and they disappeared on me. Not only was I heartbroken that I couldn't start the dig, but I was devastated financially. I was counting on that. That was everything. I thought I was gonna make it. I was at least gonna get that barrel of diamonds that was supposed to have been there, and I was gonna be rich beyond my wildest dreams. I think Roger Rogelio Rojas in the Philippines, who claimed that Marcos stole his treasure. I believe that his treasure was valued at $22 billion. It's said that there's over $1 trillion buried in the Philippines. I thought that I was gonna, all my problems were gonna disappear. And instead, my business partners took my $1,500 and they ran. Now, Mike Appleton, I shouldn't have used his whole name, but Mike, and his contact had threatened me at this point already, for partnering with Maury and doing this dig. But at that point, me and Mike had already parted ways. Things were pretty irreparable between our friendship and the issues with his girlfriend and whatnot, and the argument that I had with his contact here in the United States, who I did look up, and he is banned from the Philippines. Married to a Filipino woman, and he is banned from the Philippines. I believe internationally. I believe at some point he was arrested by Interpol. It was a big deal. I looked him up. I found his office here in the United States in Los Angeles. That was a big mess. But I'd already had threats on my life at this time. I caught up with my old business partner Carl at the hotel where he used to live and where Mike lived, and figured out which room Carl was staying in, and I knocked on his door, and he answered, and he slammed the door in my face. So I went back to my room and I wrote a little note and I said, "Hey, I don't want no trouble. Um, I just need your help. I need the money back that was taken. That's all I have." Uh, I waited, met up with a friend, a younger guy named Brian. He's another story. Um, Brian was a Filipino guy who grew up in the United States. His mom brought him to the United States as a child and never got his paperwork or his citizenship together. So when Brian was a teenager, he got into some trouble like teenagers do. I think he stole a car and he got put in jail. And when he was released from jail, he was deported to the Philippines and he could never come back to the United States. Well, me and Brian became friends. Brian was there with me, and me and Brian were starting to have a couple drinks. And Carl, my ex-business partner, came to the door and he threatened me. He said, "Son, you're lucky you're still alive." And I looked at him and I shook my head and I said, "Wrong answer, Carl." And I told Brian, "Shut that door." And Brian shut that door and I beat the daylights out of Carl. It was really bad. I punched him until I couldn't anymore, and then I kicked him until my boot sole broke. And in the end, I didn't know if he would survive. I was terrified. Thought I'd spend the rest of my life in a Filipino prison. And me and Brian got the hell out of there. Now, by the time I got back to my place in Mintow, Carl's girlfriend had already contacted my wife and notified her that she had already put out a contract on my life through 3 different organizations in the Philippines. I was buzzed up. She had my father on the phone, and my father was begging me to go to the U.S. Embassy for help. Being as young as I was and headstrong as I was, I thought I was gonna be attacked. I stayed home and locked the house up. I slept off the alcohol. And the next morning, we sent my younger sister-in-law to the back entrance of our subdivision there to get some food at the wet market. And she called us and said that the Filipino police were at the back gate of the subdivision getting suited up in SWAT gear, and they were looking for a young foreigner. Me and my brother-in-law ran, and we caught a taxi, and we went up the mountain. My wife met us later up the mountain, and we took off to Cagayan de Oro. And in Cagayan de Oro, we got on a to-go ship going to Manila. The boat docked in Tondo, and I went to the embassy, and I told the embassy what I was involved in and what I had got myself into, and that I believed that there was people who wanted to kill me. And the embassy told me that they couldn't help me. They said my best bet is to stay in Manila, and that the police there most likely wouldn't know the people in Davao that wanted to harm me, And my best bet was to stay near the embassy so that way I could go there for help. And that's how I got into, I started the process of trying to figure out how to leave the country and go home and figure out my overstay and everything. I went back sometime later through the process of all this and spent a little bit more time in Davao. When things cooled down, I prepared myself. I picked up a guard dog. I bought a pit bull in Manila, trained him well. We still have him in Davao. And I never got my $1,500 back. I never seen Maury again. I think I seen him once. I was on a jeepney coming from Ulas going to Mintal. I think it was on Buddha Road. And I think I seen him walking. He used to walk everywhere. Never seen Carl again either. I seen him once too. I think he was sitting in a little diner on San Pedro. We crossed eyes. And that was it. That was the last time I seen either of those guys. From what I hear, Carl's not around anymore. He got sick, and I believe he went home or he passed away. And that brings me back to whether or not it's a scam. Gold hunting in the Philippines, is it a scam? I've seen things with my friend Mike there that would suggest that it is true, and I still believe to this day that under the right circumstances, you could find something in the Philippines that would make you rich beyond your wildest dreams. Will I ever get involved with it again? No, I won't. No, I won't. And since then, I had a friend named Sherman, who was also a Vietnam veteran, and he had been wounded in action, and he received 100% disability benefits from the VA and a large chunk of back pay going back years. And he went totally broke with his wife trying to find this treasure. And I believe he lost hundreds of thousands of dollars doing this. So for me, I luckily only lost $1,500, but there are people who lose hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it is possible. So for the most part, to the average Joe, if you go there looking for this, you're probably gonna get scammed. If you meet the right people, it's very possible that you could find something. But my advice is don't get involved in it. There are some things that I left out of this story and some names that I left out intentionally because I do intend to move back to the Philippines, and speaking about some of these things could bring back some old nightmares or potentially get me harmed in the future, and I'm not looking to do that. When I go back to the Philippines this time, I want a simple life. I'm retired now. I'm retired early. I'm a disabled veteran, and I want to go there and live peacefully, raise my children with good, strong moral values, the type that they have in the Philippines. And I don't want to get involved in any of this stuff. And from me to you as my viewers, if I could give you any advice, is don't go there looking for gold, because it's not at the end of the rainbow. You're not just gonna magically get rich. But for tonight, that's all I got for you guys. I hope you enjoyed the story. I went through quite a bit, and I would like to someday write a book. Threats on my life, things that I survived. I don't know how I did it. But anyways, you guys have a good night. And if you liked this story or you found it interesting or informational, hit that like and subscribe button for me. and I'll talk to you guys next time. Good night, YouTube.